off-road car ads, you would have to have one man driving one car and a woman driving another car. And in fact, the gender continuum stretched quite a lot now, so you could have all sorts of cars being driven by all sorts of people. I mean, it'd be. Can you? I guess, Katie, the question is: does it sound practical that you could do this?
Well, I think it's perhaps aspirational, but it's good to raise it as a conversation, isn't it? And think about actually how sexist is the advertising industry and various ads. I mean, if you look at the fashion industry and makeup and beauty industries, I think the whole thing is questionable in terms of sexism and the stereotypes about women in particular. I mean, I don't know about your listeners, but as a woman over 40, I'm so sick of some of my favourite New Zealand fashion houses constantly having tall, skinny 17-year-olds who most of whom probably can't afford to actually buy their clothing.
Yeah.
Are the only ones that you see in the ads, and it's kind of tedious. It gets really boring.
I just wonder what the alternative is, though. Is it like just a picture of the product and a wee line saying "Fafa does Fafa"? Like, what have you got left?
Well, no, I mean, there are some people who've got diversity of people in their ads. Like Karen Walker has done a great campaign with older women over 60, modelling for her. And I think that she's still trying to sell her products and they're expensive, but it's just showing that actually older women can be fashionable and look great in these products, and they're probably more likely to buy them, actually, in terms of their financial stability, etc. So I just think, mixing it up a little bit is at least makes it more interesting.
Another big topic we've just got time to touch on before we go, courtesy of the UK. We won't be doing this here, but people will have to enter their credit card details now in Britain to prove they're over 18 before viewing pornography online. Our government's going to keep an eye on this and see how it works as it rolls out. Katie, I'll ask you first. Do you think something has to be done? And what is your opinion of this kind of initiative?
Well, yeah, this is pretty interesting because there's a lot of people all around the world wringing their hands about access to pornography and the effects of it. There's lots of research about the harms and the issues and risks and exposure of young people. And I think, I do think the conversation needs to be had. Whether that's the answer, I'm not sure. I mean, people are raising privacy concerns about that and credit card use. I think it would definitely have some kind of impact. I think it's a tricky one. My personal view is that we need to start with having conversations with young people as parents and as teachers, certainly in sexuality education in schools, as one response. But this is an interesting and possibly a creative solution.
It is interesting.
There was an opportunity missed a long time ago in the dawn of the internet, to actually carve off the porn industry and give it its own network. That was, it would have been harder to just access the whole thing.
Yeah,
and you just couldn't put it
or something.
But that never flew, which is a shame.
Katie's
I like
right.
how 9 out of 10 men admit to watching porn in the last year, which 1 out of 10 men are afraid of their wives.
I found that a startlingly high statistic. Katie Fitzpatrick, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Tim.
And Lisa Scott, you too. People are saying it's been a lovely day in Dunedin.
Oh, what would they know? Are they here?
Just to contradict you. Always a pleasure to have your company. And Finlay McDonald, you too.
Thank you, Jim.
We are back tomorrow, everybody, and Checkpoint tonight with Sharon Brett Kelly is coming right up.
Kia ora everyone, I'm Sharon Brett Kelly, and on behalf of our excellent team, Haere mai, welcome to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Tonight, Team New Zealand releases the first details of protocol for the next America's Cup, indicating a constructed in-country rule as well as a requirement for crews to be citizens of the country they are competing for. Inland Revenue staff are told 30% of its workforce will be gone by 2021. IRD's Commissioner Naomi Ferguson joins us. Labor lays out its alternative budget. We go live to a public meeting on the future of the Manawatu Gorge, and an elderly woman waits for an insurance payout 3 months after her Edgecumbe home was red-stickered.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batinaho. Inland Revenue staff are worried job cuts to 30% of its workforce could threaten the integrity of the entire tax system. Staff have today been told about changes that will affect up to 4,000 jobs in some way. The National Secretary of the PSA, Aaron Palachuk, says it's still unclear what the final proposal means for staff and they're worried for the future.
They are concerned about, for example, a change process happening at the same time that there's major technology shifts as well, or new systems being brought in, and that if those systems fail, there might not be the people needed to fix them up.
Aaron Palachuk from the PSA. Inland Revenue says there'll be no reduction in frontline staff. It says 900 workers will be re-offered jobs and another 900 cut. IID says there'll be fewer management roles but more specialist ones. Labour's leader Andrew Little insists the party's alternative budget is affordable. The party's committing to spending an extra $17 billion over 4 years on health, education and family incomes if elected to power. Here's our political editor Jane Patterson.
Labour would raise the extra money by scrapping National's planned tax cuts through higher tax revenue from multinationals and property speculators and by paying down debt at a slower rate. It would continue to deliver surpluses, but smaller than the ones forecast by National. Mr Little says it's a credible plan that prioritises spending on health and education over tax cuts. He says there's about $800 million a year of unallocated money, some of which could be used to accommodate spending demands in post-election negotiations. National says it's Labour's usual tax and spend approach that will also result in higher debt. From Parliament, Jane Patterson.
Team New Zealand says syndicates contesting the next America's Cup will have to have more sailors from their home countries and build their own boats. It's released bare outlines of the next Cup, which it expects to stage in Auckland in early 2021. Our Auckland correspondent Todd Nile reports.
The early insights into the new rules don't say how many of a team's sailors must come from their home country. Boats would have to be built in the team's own country, but the impact on New Zealand's boat building industry is unclear. A Warkworth-based firm owned by Oracle built much of the American and Japanese boats and elements for other challengers. Details the team says it will release in September will clarify which parts of a boat, such as the hull, wings or appendages, can be built where. In Auckland, Todd Nile.
The Finance Minister, Stephen Joyce, says the Canterbury District Health Board needs to engage with government ministries to solve its financial woes. A Treasury document says instead of making financial trade-offs, the Health Board uses media and public pressure in a bid to increase funding. Senior Canterbury doctors have strongly criticised the report, saying Treasury is attacking all Cantabrians. Mr Joyce says the doctors are using the media to discuss the issue and are proving Treasury's point. The Mayor of Horowhenua is calling for his council's chief executive to stand down and for an investigation to be held into the way the organisation has been run. Michael Fayan says a leaked internal audit, which has been deliberately withheld, highlights serious risks at the council. The audit included concerns that emails from blacklisted senders were intercepted and diverted to the council's chief executive, David Clapperton. Mr Fayan says a council meeting to discuss these concerns this evening has been cancelled due to 6 councillors falling sick. He says it's time the public knew what has been going on.
I want the CE to stand down and pending a forensic investigation, but I can't actually order that myself without the support of councillors who from the very beginning have said they support the CE and not the new mayor.
The Mayor of Horowhenua, Michael Fayan. The emergency department at Auckland's largest hospital is under severe strain from a surge in people seeking health care. Middlemore Hospital's emergency department is now seeing up to 400 people a day, including around 100 children. The acting chief medical officer at the hospital, Vanessa Thornton, says the surge is putting stress on staff and laboratories and forcing patients to wait much longer for a bed. She says people should aim to visit their doctor first before going to the emergency department. It's 5:05. To sport, All Blacks Beauden Barrett and Dane Coles returned to the Hurricanes line-up for their Super Rugby quarter-final against the Brumbies in Canberra on Friday. Barrett missed last weekend's win over the Crusaders because of a sinus infection, while Coles, whose start on the bench, has spent the past 4 months recovering from concussion symptoms. However, the defending champions will be without centre Vince Asor for the second week in a row because of a groin strain. Meanwhile, Queensland first five Quade Cooper has been left out of the Wallabies' extended squad for this year's Rugby Championship. Coach Michael Checker says Cooper needs to prove he still enjoys the game before he'll pick him again. The Warriors coach Stephen Kearney has warned of serious consequences for his team if they don't start performing the way he wants them to. Kearney was particularly disappointed with the Warriors' second half capitulation in last Friday's loss to the Penrith Panthers. Kearney admits some of his players are inexperienced at this level, so he'll continue to support them, but his patience isn't endless.
When you do make a mistake, you pay a pretty hefty price when you do. So, and that's the reason why I'll keep showing them and keep giving them the information, keep demanding that's what's expected of them. And if it doesn't sink in, then I'll have to make a couple of decisions.
The Warriors face the North Queensland Cowboys in Townsville this Saturday. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, all aboard the Decimal Express. Former Reserve Bank staffer David Parsons tells the story of the secret train that helped deliver New Zealand's new currency just over 50 years ago. Linda Changwai Earl flies solo with New Zealand's junior squash champ Rihanna Taiapa, who just happened to get pregnant at the age of 13. And this week's overseas correspondent Shobha Narayan is on the line from India on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Taranaki, including Coromandel Bay of Plenty, Taupo and also Gisborne. Often cloudy with a few showers, turning to rain tomorrow with heavy falls and possible downpours, especially in Bay of Plenty. Northeast gales for a time tomorrow. Whanganui to Manawatu, also Taihape, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa. Mainly fine today, cloud increasing tomorrow with rain from evening. Horowhenua to Wellington, a few showers today, rain tomorrow evening. Nelson Buller, Westland and Fiordland, occasional rain. Heavy falls about Fiordland from tonight and Nelson late tomorrow. Marlborough and Canterbury, high cloud, occasional rain about the Sounds today, spreading south to Christchurch tomorrow evening. Otago and Southland, high cloud with a few spots of rain today, also a period of rain tomorrow morning. And the Chatham Islands, occasional rain. It's 5:05 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Kia ora, good evening. Welcome to Checkpoint. I'm Sharon Brett Kelly in for John Campbell. IRD offices were closed this afternoon as staff were briefed about changes to hundreds of roles that will kick in from next year. The Public Service Association says staff are concerned job cuts to 30% of its workforce will threaten the integrity of the tax system and that up to 4,000 jobs would be affected in some way. But Inland Revenue says that's not the case, and the changes are all about a technology transformation. The IRD Commissioner is Naomi Ferguson. A few minutes ago, I asked her when IRD staff could expect to have some certainty about their future.
We have announced to our staff that 3,300 staff in customer-facing roles will all be being offered new roles or confirmed straight into new roles. And that will be happening over the next few months for them. But they know today that that is what will be happening for their jobs.
How many jobs will go?
So as a result of what we've announced today, we're not actually announcing job losses. We've been changing our organisation so that we work and organise ourselves around customers, around individuals and around businesses. And what we've done is allocate people to those new organisational groupings within the department and created different roles for people.
But some jobs will go, won't they? I mean, we're getting a figure of about 1,500 or up to 30% of the workforce.
That, over the course of our transformation and at the end of the transformation in around 2020-21, we expect to be able to run the work that we do as a department with fewer people, and that's been something our staff have known for some time. But today's announcements are actually about reorganising how we work so that we support customers better and, importantly, creating an opportunity for our staff to get new skills and learn new skills as we transform, well ahead of us having to make any reductions in the staffing numbers.
So what you're saying that by February next year that staff will have a better idea of what jobs they have, what roles they'll be in?
So today they know the jobs that will be being offered to them. The process for most of our staff will be that in the next few weeks, by September, they'll be asked to express a preference, and they will be offered a role in October. As I say, 3,300 frontline staff will be offered a role in October. That's a role for all of the staff in our frontline. And in addition to that, we're creating some 900 new roles, mainly in management and specialist areas. And again, the 900 or so people affected will be able to apply for those roles. So this is not about a reduction in roles and jobs. At this point, this is about changing how we work and giving people the opportunity to grow new skills as we transform, well ahead of us having to potentially think about any future reductions.
The union says that staff are also worried about the integrity of inland revenue if the computer system breaks down.
Our staff and myself are always worried about the integrity of the tax system, and that's actually why we're making the changes, because we know that our world is changing, the way in which our customers are operating is changing, and we need to have the skills for the future to be able to deal with that. So what we're doing is actually creating an organisation that's much more resilient, both in terms of technology, but importantly in terms of our people's skills. And the investment in our skills over the next few years will be substantial to ensure that everyone working for the organisation can operate in a digital world, the world that's coming to us all.
Some tax advisors that I talked to yesterday are concerned about these jobs going, because they're worried that experienced, skilled people in the investigations area where the fraud work is done, that kind of thing, are going to be cut, and those people can't be replaced, that they have years of experience. What do you say to that?
Again, Sharon, what we've announced today is that there are no job losses in those frontline staff. That includes the investigators. And indeed, we made changes to the consultation proposals as a result of feedback from our investigators to make sure that we had the right technical capabilities for the future.
But you're saying that there'll be no job losses, but in 3 years' time, or by 2021, there will be a significant number of jobs that are gone from inland revenue.
So by 2021, we'll have made a lot of changes to our policies and our processes and the way we work and to our technology. That means we believe that we can continue to operate the tax system with fewer folk. Digital is disrupting every business. Technology is taking away jobs. We're no different to any other sector, any other profession. And what we're doing today is actually announcing and helping our staff build the skills and capabilities so that they're ready to operate in the future world. Many of them will continue to work for us. Some of them over the next few years may decide to go to other careers or professions, but we're going to make sure that they actually have the skills to work in a digital world.
And that's IRD Commissioner Naomi Ferguson. Dean Barker, Jimmy Spittle and Glenn Ashby could find themselves scrambling for citizenship of other countries following an indication of new protocols for the next America's Cup. Team New Zealand has released the first details of the next America's Cup, indicating it is likely to be held in Auckland in 2021 with strict conditions, including a constructed in-country rule for boats, as well as a requirement for crews to be citizens of the country they are competing for. Dr. Mark Orams is a yachting commentator and head of sport and recreation at AUT. I spoke with him earlier and asked him what the changes will mean.
It's really a move back to the original concept for the America's Cup, and that is that it is a contest between yacht clubs of foreign nations, and that both the boats themselves and the people sailing them should be citizens of those nations.
For New Zealand and the boat building industry, I mean, the last event was quite a bonanza. So those major boats were largely built in Warkworth. So what does it mean for them?
Well, of course, there are many components that get built in these boats, and I'm sure that the rule won't say anything about some of the componentry and small aspects of it, because that would exclude a number of nations who don't have high-tech boat building industries from potentially challenging. So I don't think it's the end for core composites and Warkworth. I mean, that's their decision, of course, but there'll still be plenty of opportunities for business for them, and of course they already do a whole series of business outside of the America's Cup. They have good business opportunities with other areas to do with manufacturing and modern composite technology. So I don't think that's of major concern, but that's their call and their owner's call as to where they're located.
Or could they relocate? I mean, they could maybe stay here but send some of their workers to other countries.
Yeah, absolutely. So there could be a scenario, for example, where the hulls, if the hulls or hull, if it's a monohull, have to be constructed in country of origin, they could be done, and then it could be shipped out to New Zealand for fitting out and for commissioning ready to sail. So that's an option for them, as it is for any other potential challenger as well. All the challengers coming to New Zealand will want to spend significant time here, and so that will be of major benefit for New Zealand. And it may well be that they ship their basic yachts down here and then fit them out and trial them and then eventually compete in them down here in New Zealand. So those options are all available to challenging nations. But I think the important concept here is that the America's Cup, throughout its over 150-year history, has been a competition between yacht clubs from sovereign nations. And the erosion, I think, has been unfortunate in the last several cycles, that it's almost been kind of token gesture, where we've got both sailors and boats and equipment coming from all over the place, as opposed to what was the original concept as set down under the Deed of Gift in 1851.
That nationality requirement, though, where does that leave Dean Barker? Because, of course, he headed the Japanese crew this last time.
Yes, well, it'll be an interesting one for not just Dean Barker, but for people like Jimmy Spithill as well. Obviously, they were competing for nations that they're not citizens of, so they've got to make a decision. They would have, if they have an opportunity, I would assume, and it depends on the rules of the particular nation involved, as to whether they become a citizen of that country, and that's for them to make that call. But I'm actually in support of this idea. I think that it seems a little bit strange that you have a team with a country name like USA, and there's only one sailor on board from that country. Similarly, a team called Team Japan, where there's only one Japanese citizen on board the yacht. So that's not really what was in mind for the America's Cup, and I think to move back to having the crew, the competing crew, citizens or nationals of the country of the challenging yacht club is a good thing.
It could also mean, though, that Team New Zealand loses Glenn Ashby.
Well, potentially, but of course he's been resident in New Zealand for quite some time now, so he would meet the eligibility to apply for New Zealand citizenship, I assume, if he chose to. So that's an option available, not just for him, but for others as well.
And of course,
4 years away to the next Cup, summer of 2021.
And also, Mark, there's no mention of what class of yacht will be used in this statement. We'll have to wait until September, it seems.
Yes, that's right. So it's just a really preliminary, if you like, kind of setting some of the ground rules or the philosophy. And the two decisions that they have indicated, well, there are three things. One, that they're going to hold it in Auckland, probably the early summer of 2021. Secondly, that they're going to bring back a country of origin in terms of construction. They haven't said how much, what percentage, whether it's 100%, 50%. And thirdly, that the competing crew, so those are the people who are actually racing the yacht, need to be nationals of the yacht club of the country of origin. So they've given an indication there, or put a stake in the ground, if you like, of where they're seeing this go. So it'll be interesting as to whether that same philosophy is applied to the yachts, because, of course, it's only been the last two Cups that we've gone to multi-hulls and foiling yachts. So be interesting to see what Team New Zealand and the Royal New Zealand Yacht Squadron, together with the Challenger of Record from Italy, announce for the next boat. I'd be very surprised if they go back to a boat that's not high performance and cutting edge, because that is the tradition of the America's Cup. Whether that's a foiling multi-hull, whether it's a mono-hull with foils, I'm not sure. But I'd be confident that we will see the sort of yacht that they have the parameters around continues with the tradition of the America's Cup being cutting edge and at the pinnacle of the sport of sailing internationally.
And that was Dr Mark Orams. Labor has made its main economic pitch to voters with its alternative budget, under which billions more would be spent on health, education and boosting family incomes. Its leader Andrew Little says the party's put out its shingle ahead of the election with a plan that ditches tax cuts in favour of higher social spending. Here's our political editor Jane Patterson.
If elected to power, Labor would spend $17 billion more on health, education and boosting family incomes over the next 4 years. At a medical centre in Kilburnie, its finance spokesperson Grant Robertson outlined how Labor intended to pay for it.
We are not taking on National's tax cut package. In addition to that, yesterday we announced our crackdown on multinational tax that will produce revenue that Inland Revenue has indicated is $600 million more over 3 years than the National Party have put in place. And we are also, as part of our budget responsibility rules, have a slightly slower debt repayment track than the National Party does.
Labor and the Greens are partners under a memorandum of understanding, but Mr Little says this is Labor's plan alone.
We've put out our shingle, we've talked about our priorities, where we want to invest and spend, and how we're going to do that. For other parties, look, we're all in the same contest for the party vote. They put up their spending plans, but this is our plan.
On current polling, Labor would have to have at least one confidence in supply partner to form a government, and the Greens and New Zealand First have already announced pricey spending plans of their own. Mr Robertson says Labor has to make allowance for that.
In the first year there's the best part of $800 million that's currently unallocated. Some of that would be available for managing and dealing with coalition partner commitments. Other parts of it is around reprioritisation.
The President of the Council of Trade Unions, Richard Wagstaff, says the new spending on public services is urgently needed, but voters now have a clear choice.
We can either provide for much needed spending in health and education and housing and so on, or we can give money to the already well off through tax cuts. Working people are recognising the real struggle they're having now in the provision of core public services in the health sector and the education services.
However, National's campaign chair Stephen Joyce dismisses the plan as Labor's usual tax and spend approach.
They are proposing to borrow $7.2 billion more, and that's actually not the time to be doing that. We should be paying debt down. And then secondly, they don't seem to have much to show for it. So they're cancelling tax threshold adjustments for low and middle income New Zealanders.
There is another unidentified revenue stream of $105 million a year in the Labor plan, understood to be a tourist levy, the details of which will be announced in the coming weeks. Labor's plan will not be finalised until the release of the pre-election fiscal update on the 23rd of August. Mr Robertson says it would make some revisions to its alternative budget then. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
A senior constable wept as she described to a court the bloody scene where a child had been shot in the head. Gustav Otto Samt has denied a charge of manslaughter relating to the death of his 2-year-old daughter Amokura Daniel Samt and is on trial at the High Court in Auckland. Our court reporter Edward Gay filed this report and a warning the details may disturb some people.
Senior Constable Jackie Fife was in one of 2 police cars on their way to make an arrest in a fraud investigation when her car was waved down by a woman on Favona Road in Mangere on June the 2nd last year.
I ran past the lady and was confronted by a man holding a small child. He was covered in blood and there was a large pool of blood on the ground when I ran in.
Miss Fife said she approached the man who was making a howling noise.
My job was to check if that child was alive. So I went up to him further and I asked him to give me the child. But there was no response, so I looked at her. I didn't know it was a little girl, but I looked.
You don't need to describe the injuries. If you're on his content, perhaps I can just leave as witness that there was no sign of life.
No, she wasn't moving and she didn't have half of her head.
She said Constable Yutaro Kanai told her to get away and pushed her. A short time later, she noticed a car parked close by with 3 young children inside. She and another colleague covered the children's faces with their jackets and carried them down the driveway. When Miss Fife had finished giving her evidence, she left the courtroom and loud crying could be heard outside. Constable Yutaro Kanai also gave evidence. He said he noticed the blood as he came down the driveway and he stood by Mr. Sanft and put his arm on his shoulder.
In amongst the crying and wailing, I heard the defendant say, "I shot her."
He said eventually he convinced Mr. Sanft to put Amakura down and walk down the driveway. He said Mr. Sanft continued to talk while they sat in an ambulance.
So he said, "I pulled the trigger. She was just playing up. I'm sorry, my baby. My son, what have I done?" And he kept repeating that. "My son, what have I done? I shot her, what have I done?"
Under cross-examination, Mr. Kanai was asked by Mr. Sanft's lawyer Phil Hamlin if he could be mistaken about what his client had actually said.
But I've gone over this over and over and over in my head. What I saw that day and heard that day, I can't, as much as I want to forget it, I can't.
Another constable, Sepa R. Lamb, told the court she grabbed Amakura's mother, Julia Daniels, to stop her going down the driveway. Soon after, Constable Kanai brought Mr. Sanft towards where they were standing.
She yelled out to him, "What happened? What happened?" And then that's when he replied back, "I shot her, I shot her." And then that's when I grabbed her and then I held her to stop her from hearing anything else. And she was just screaming, "What?"
The trial's been set down for 3 weeks. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi ko Edward Gay ahau.
The Earthquake Commission, EQC, is being blamed for long delays in insurance payouts from April's Edgecumbe floods. Many of the worst affected people with homes right by where the stock bank breached are still waiting, and some have had no contact with their EQC case manager. Tonight, Checkpoint can reveal that may be in part because just 3 people have been tasked with dealing with all 271 claims. Zach Fleming has more.
It's devastating, Ashley.
Yep, it's devastating, all
Oh,
right.
it's all come to life now.
It's like the rivers in the backyard.
Yeah.
We first met Edgecumbe resident Ursula Mayo back in April. Her home was a write-off.
It was obvious from day one, and in fact I even suggested that to the insurers, that you could stand at the end of the street and tell it wasn't going to be built again, or any possibility of being lived in.
But 3 months on, how far has her son Mark Mayo got with tower insurance?
I really don't know. We haven't got anywhere yet.
The 3-bedroom house on Rata Avenue is around just 60 metres away from the stock bank that breached on April the 6th, causing Edgecumbe to flood. Checkpoint visited the property in the days after. The backyard had been turned into a river. Today it's fenced off. Nobody is allowed in.
It's now basically pretty much broken in half. It's been caved in from behind, and all the ground's gone from under it, so the back half of the house has actually fallen into probably a 2-metre sort of hole. It's totally written off, and in fact it's got worse over the last couple of months.
So, house, unlivable. Section, also unlivable. Tower refused to discuss Ursula's case with us, only saying third parties are causing delays. But Mark says Tower's telling him the hold-up's due to a familiar foe.
The only thing I'm getting back from the insurance is they're putting it on EQC. They're saying they're waiting for EQC's input to it.
EQC, the Earthquake Commission. It's become synonymous with stress headache following the Christchurch earthquakes. And for Edgecumbe, EQC received 271 claims. 3 people were assigned to deal with all 271 of those claims, 90 per person. When I put that to Mark Mayo, he wasn't surprised.
Because I've had no response from the EQC, I think maybe 2 emails, one after some prompting from them to eventually assign a case manager, who I've had no communication with. So yeah, we really are in the dark a little bit.
So Ursula's home is undoubtedly one of the worst affected. Logic says it'd be one of the most clear-cut cases. But as you just heard, Mark says he's never heard from his EQC case manager. Earthquake Commission Minister Jerry Brownlee wasn't available for an interview today, but EQC provided a statement.
65% of properties in Edgecumbe have been cleared. Some properties in Edgecumbe were badly damaged and engineering assessments are being undertaken, so EQC can determine whether the land can be remediated or the land claim can be cash settled. EQC is working hard to resolve all Edgecumbe claims as quickly as possible.
Tim Grafton from the Insurance Council says insurers have paid out 70% of the 1,400 claims received from Edgecumbe. He says progress has been slow with some for several reasons, waiting for homes to dry out fully before they can be assessed.
Also, quite a few of these properties built at a time when asbestos was used extensively. So clearing asbestos out of properties has also been a time-consuming job. And also because the time the properties have been underwater, mould has gone in. And that has to be removed as well for health and safety reasons, obviously, to fix up the house. So it hasn't just been a straightforward flood.
And he says that EQC is causing delays too. It has to assess whether properties were damaged due to a landslip or flood. If it's a landslip, EQC pays out more. And if you're wondering why insurance companies can't just pay out customers and get the money off EQC later...
EQC has, under the current piece of legislation, a statutory obligation to pay the insured, not the insurer.
So it doesn't work like car insurance, for example, where your insurer pays you and chases up the money later.
Oh, well, it's a tiny piece of legislation where substantial change is needed. We argue consistently that insurers should be responsible for assessment and management of all claims, that just makes for a far more efficient recovery process.
An EQC reform bill is expected to be drafted later this year, but the changes it proposes aren't expected to be actually implemented until 2020. In the meantime, Ursula's living in a motel paid for by Tower, while she continues to wait for EQC to assess her home. And Mark continues to worry about his mum.
I keep on trying to think if it was me, if I turned up home tonight and I wasn't allowed in my house and that was it, and I had to find somewhere else to live. So yeah, you kind of have to put yourself in their shoes.
Aliki Homes class action lawyer Matt Josephson believes Edgecumbe residents may have a good case.
Our preliminary view is they have a good case against the Regional Council, possibly also Trustpower. But basically, we think that the Regional Council didn't put a catchment scheme in place adequately.
Public meetings are being held on Friday and Saturday for any residents who want to take their case to court. For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
And we asked EQC how many claims it has settled. It refused to say. Well, public meetings will be held tonight in Ashurst and Woodville for residents frustrated about the extended closure of the Manawatu Gorge. The road has been closed since a slip in April, and the New Zealand Transport Agency pulled all staff out of the area 10 days ago, saying the sliding hillside made conditions too dangerous to work safely. Our reporter Jacob McSweeney is at the Valley View Centre in Ashurst. Hello, Jacob.
Hello.
How many people are there?
Hard to say right now, but it's definitely looking like it's well over 300 so far, and people are still coming in. I can see some people just coming in now. I'm at the door. The meeting's just kicked off. They had set out seats for what looked like about 200 when I talked to the NZTA people, and someone's just telling me now about 240.
What are their issues? What are the people most concerned about?
So it's really a tale of two towns. You like you said there, I'm in Ashurst. So this is a small suburban town. There aren't many shops at all. It's largely houses. It's quite flat. There are kids that run along the sides of the street. And the issue here for people in Ashurst is big trucks just running through the town, which now they are basically the main road for people coming from Hawke's Bay to the Manawatu. So their issue is that road is just not, they're just not used to having big trucks and stinky sort of cattle trucks coming through as well. And they want basically a safer alternative there. And the other issue is the road itself. The saddle road is just pockmarked. There are temporary speed limits throughout it. It is very curvy. It doesn't handle well with bad weather. They largely want certainty. And they're hoping to get that today from NZTA.
Thanks, Jacob. That's our reporter Jacob McSweeney at the Valley View Centre in Ashurst. Coming up, the desperate plight of the working poor. A public meeting in the Northland town of Dargaville today reveals the extent of homelessness for people who have jobs, and the frozen remains of a Swiss couple who went missing 75 years ago in the Alps have been found lying together intact on a shrinking glacier. But first, here's Katrina Batten with the headlines.
The Finance Minister says Inland Revenue's new IT system is not to blame for the job losses announced today. Inland Revenue announced that a third of its workforce will go by 2021. Stephen Joyce says the new IT system requires the same number of staff, but over time IID will need fewer people to do processing. Team New Zealand says syndicates contesting the next America's Cup will have to have more sailors from their home countries on board and build their own boats. It's released bare outlines of the next Cup, which it expects to stage in Auckland in early 2021. The emergency department at Auckland's largest hospital is under severe strain from a surge in people seeking health care. Meadowmore Hospital's emergency department is now seeing up to 400 people a day, including around 100 children, and the hospital says numbers are putting a strain on staff and creating long wait times. Public meetings to discuss the possible permanent closure of the Manawatu Gorge road are getting underway tonight. The New Zealand Transport Agency is meeting people in Woodville and Ashurst to tell them about the state of an unstable hillside, which has made the Gorge Road repair work unsafe. The Kaipara Mayor, Greg Gent, says he was unaware of the extent of homelessness in Dargaville until a community meeting this afternoon. Ministers serving the Tongan community say at least 6 families have been evicted from homes recently bought by investors or retirees, many of them from Auckland. Shelters for Dargaville's homeless will be set up in unused buildings in the town. The Chief Executive of the Transport Ministry has owned up to trying to hide information from the Labour Party. RNZ News has revealed that the ministry was planning to tell a Labour MP that information she'd requested about the fraudster Joanne Harrison did not exist, despite knowing that it did. The ministry's Chief Executive, Peter Mercy, says he takes full responsibility for the move to hide the truth. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6.
Thanks, Katrina. Turning to business news now with Nona Peltier. Nona, good afternoon. Latest research indicates Māori businesses have outperformed New Zealand's largest listed companies. So what are they doing better?
Well, apparently it's collaboration, so I guess that makes sense. They spent a lot more time talking with each other, and there was a survey of 31 different entities, and they found that collaboration was one of the key differences. So they outperformed the listed companies. They had an 8.2% average return on their assets, valued at about $4.6 billion, and that was versus the largest listed companies. There was 30 that they looked at. 7.7%. So definitely the iwi did better. As well, a 5.6% return for the listed property sector. So overall, they were performing better, and they were also transitioning more of their assets from cash and sort of those low risk types of assets into a higher yielding growth assets. So overall, it was a pretty good picture.
Fascinating stuff. And New Zealand is one of the top 10 destinations for Chinese tourists. But it seems hotels aren't doing enough to meet their needs. So where are they falling short?
Well, Wi-Fi is one thing. I mean, we all sort of expect that, but a lot of hotels don't really offer Wi-Fi. Still, can you believe it? But anyway, so these China, yeah, I know. I was surprised. I thought, really, wouldn't they? But no, apparently not. The other things are that the Chinese visitors are changing. So they are they want more from their visits. They're not just happy to sit on a bus and go on a shopping trip. They're looking for dining experiences. They're wanting to do sightseeing. They're looking for independent trips. So they're looking for guides that are written in Mandarin. They're looking for also backpacking experiences, and they're not so interested in sort of being herded about. So it is important that there is good quality language services, and this is something that should be expected. I mean, Chinese visitors account for an awful lot of the tourists to New Zealand, and so hoteliers should be doing a bit more, and they're not investing enough. According to the survey that Hotels.com put out, they thought that maybe only 1% of hoteliers had spent more than $10,000 in the last year upgrading their services to Chinese tourists.
Now, what's been happening on the markets today?
Well, another record day for the markets.
Another record day.
We're seeing this right across the world, really, in asset classes. So the top 50 index, it rose 18 points, up 0.2% to a record. Another record, 7,726. Our dollar gained a bit of ground as well after Donald Trump's healthcare plan went to the floor. So basically, we're up against the US dollar at 73.6 US cents. That's pretty high. 92.8 Australian, because the Australian currency is doing pretty well, and 56.5 British pence.
Excellent. Thank you, Nona. A community meeting in Dargaville this afternoon has lifted the lid on homelessness in the town. Local Methodist minister Kuli Fisi-Iali called for help after hearing of 6 Tongan families who have nowhere to live despite having jobs. But it's emerged it's not just Tongan families who are affected. Lois Williams has been in Dargaville today.
Homeless families, church ministers, masons and social services all got together around the boardroom table at Dargaville's WINS office this afternoon. They were happy for reporters to be there, but WINS was not. It's been unable to help a number of families with emergency accommodation because these are not beneficiaries, they're the working poor. The Kaipara District Mayor Greg Gent, speaking after the meeting, said the so-called Auckland halo effect has finally caught up with Dargaville.
The problem New Zealand faces is hitting regional centres like ours. It's amazing, but we're getting Auckland drift up here. People can buy a house here for a half or a third of the price, and that means property values are going up, rentals are going up, and there's a scarcity of rentals, and that's tough for families, for low-income families, really tough.
At First National Real Estate, agent Jill Wilson says there's just one house listed for rent in Dargaville right now, and it's not ready for tenants. It needs repairs and cleaning. The company manages 167 rental homes in the area, but there's now a serious shortage. And at open homes for rentals, 30 desperate families at a time are turning up for viewings. Jill Wilson says Auckland investors and retirees have discovered Dargaville and they've been buying up rental stock, but there's also been a flurry of activity by locals buying their first homes.
I think that you've got quite a few of the mid-20-year-olds who have actually saved their deposits. They're able to access different first-home buyer schemes as well, and they're able to now access the KiwiSaver as it's maturing, so they can buy their first home.
Whatever the reason, there are families on the street in a town that's never before had a homeless problem. The Reverend Kuli Fisi-Iali says today's meeting revealed another 3 families living in their cars at a local reserve, and these are not members of the Tongan community. He says the churches and others have decided to contact the owners of any empty houses in the district and ask them if they'd be prepared to allow a homeless family to move in.
If we find a house vacant, if the property needs to fix before family moving in, then we offer our service to do the work. We can do the cleaning, the painting, putting a new carpet or wallpaper and all those kind of stuff.
Mr. Fisi-Iali's wife Lucy runs a playgroup for the children and mothers of the homeless families, and she finds it hard to talk about their plight without tearing up. One family, she says, had been living in their car for a week with 3 children in a car park near public toilets before their minister found them.
They've been staying with the sister, and the landlord found out that they overcrowded, so they're warning them. So it's best for them to move and stay in the car.
And they couldn't find a house. That's sad. Yeah. The Tai Tokiro MP, Calvin Davis, who was at the meeting, has now taken up the cause of the homeless Dargaville families.
Because there are families, 13 in a house, 5 adults, 9 kids sort of scenarios, 2 or 3 generations together in the one house. And these are working families too. We're not talking about people beneficiaries, we're talking about families that are struggling just to find a place to live really, find a place close to work, and they're doing the best they can to raise their families and just to get by.
The Kaipara Mayor Greg Gent says the council can't afford to get into social housing, but it will investigate ways of using empty facilities like Dargaville's old Polytech building as a stopgap emergency housing facility that could put a temporary roof over the heads of the homeless. Anything, he says, has to be better than living in a car. For Checkpoint, Lois Williams.
6 months in and still no significant Senate victory. The American President Donald Trump and his Republican Party have failed to fulfil a major campaign promise to repeal and replace Obamacare. It's become clear they don't have enough support in Congress for their own legislation to replace former President Barack Obama's Affordable Care Act. Mr. Trump says his new healthcare policy is to now simply let Obamacare fail. The BBC's Nick Bryant has this report on the latest developments on Capitol Hill, as well as what it means for millions of Americans and their healthcare.
Few cities paid more attention to the healthcare debate than Donald Trump's hometown, where 1 in 5 New Yorkers stood to lose their coverage had Obamacare been repealed.
You're going to repeal something that millions of Americans need. I laughed. I just totally laughed.
Donna Leslie suffers from asthma, sleep apnea and an injured knee. She's delighted the Republicans failed to dismantle Obamacare. Her life would be unbearable without it.
If you take it away, I couldn't think, I couldn't even imagine the disaster that would be.
Kentucky, a Trump stronghold, was once seen as a success story of Obamacare because it brought about such a sharp drop in the number of people without health insurance.
How's the breathing been doing?
But insurance companies here have been pulling out of the health marketplace that Obamacare created, partly because of the uncertainty about its future.
Take a deep breath.
In some states, the system is in danger of collapse, and Dr. Van Breeding is fed up with the politics.
Other countries have done it. They've set the groundwork for us. We won't be a pioneer, but we can take what they've done and use it and build it to make it the best program in the world. That's why the United States is as strong as it is. We've always taken things and made them better. Why can't we take healthcare product and make it better instead of fighting over it?
Back in the spring, Donald Trump presented himself as the maestro when the House of Representatives voted to repeal and replace Obamacare.
This is a repeal and a replace of Obamacare, make no mistake about it.
But the fist pumps and hugs were premature. Divisions between right-wing and moderate Republicans meant he couldn't get the measure through the Senate. So today, a stony-faced president tried to distance himself from this embarrassing defeat.
We'll just let Obamacare fail. We're not going to own it. I'm not going to own it. I can tell you the Republicans are not going to own it. We'll let Obamacare fail, and then the Democrats are going to come to us and they're going to say, how do we fix it? How do we fix it? Or how do we come up with a new plan?
This debacle says a lot about the health of American democracy and the paralysis of the body politic. For much of the Obama administration, it was because of divided government. The Democrats had the White House, the Republicans blocked them on Capitol Hill. But now the Republicans control the White House, the Senate, the House of Representatives. It was their disunity which led to this failure. Donald Trump claimed it would take an outsider to fix America's broken politics. But 6 months into his presidency, he can't yet claim a landmark legislative success.
Nick Bryant reporting there. The Mayor of Horowhenua is calling for his council's chief executive to stand down and an investigation to be held into the way the organisation has been run. Michael Fayan says a leaked internal audit has been deliberately withheld and highlights serious risks at the council. RNZ obtained part of the audit and revealed it included concerns that emails from blacklisted addresses were intercepted and diverted to the council's chief executive, David Clapperton. Mr Fayan says a council meeting to discuss these concerns this evening has been cancelled due to 6 councillors falling sick. He told Patrick O'Mara that it's time the public knew what's been going on.
I want the CE to stand down and pending a forensic investigation. But I can't actually order that myself without the support of councillors who, from the very beginning, have said they support the CE and not the new mayor.
The majority of the council seems to be against your views.
I don't know if they're against all my views. I would be saying over this matter, I'd be a little worried too for some. And that would be my opinion. And but I think that as a council, there are numerous things that have occurred that are very good. This is not a good thing, though, and this could have had an impact on a whole lot of areas, like I said to you before, you know, on the decisions that we have made. Have we received all the information? Have we received all the information from people on the outside that want to write in and put their 2 cents worth? Because we represent those people.
Would you consider this to be a dysfunctional council?
Well, I guess you could argue that, but I mean, I'd like to have more, like many things we vote the same, you see. So, no, I don't think dysfunctional, but I wonder why the loyalties lie the way they do. Especially when you have information like this that literally none of them have taken the time to even read.
You're asking for an independent audit, but not one that's to be done by either Audit New Zealand or Local Government New Zealand. Why is that?
No, I don't think they're up to it. Well, because LGNZ have a subsidiary organisation called Equip. One of the directors of Equip is the former mayor. So, and anything that I've tried to talk to them about is definitely not helpful.
And your relation with the former mayor, this is Brendan Duffy you're talking about.
Yeah, well...
You don't have a good relationship with him?
I've never had a chance with him.
If you are calling for an independent inquiry, who should that be done by then?
I think a private company that's never dealt with this council before. You know, I think that there would be, and not chosen, you know, I really need to know they're independent, that are not influenced by government. Because what's really at stake here is democracy and freedom of speech, and that has been hindered greatly with what we've discovered with the emails. And my contacts with various regulatory authorities that sit under central government have definitely not been encouraging.
And that's the Horowhenua Mayor, Michael Fayan. Well, it's been a roller coaster ride for the regions over the past 9 years, with the rise and fall of industries like dairy, oil and gas and mining. So has it been boom or bust for regional New Zealand under the national government? As part of our Is This the Brighter Future series, Robin Martin investigates.
Sitting at Ngāmutu Beach, the site of Taranaki's oldest oil field, James Rio, a former country manager for a multinational drilling company, remembers a more recent golden age for oil and gas exploration. Just before the global financial crisis hit in 2008, oil prices peaked at nearly $150 a barrel. They then enjoyed a sustained period at about $120 a barrel, and firms were falling over themselves to seek out new sources.
You could only describe it as a boom. I think over the years, over the decades, Taranaki's gone through fits and starts, but definitely from 2008 until about mid-2014, the industry was really humming. It's really the heyday looking back.
Taranaki's median household income of $70,000 in 2013 was well ahead of the national figure of nearly $64,000. But the fall in oil prices to around $50 a barrel has had an impact. Mr. Rio says the industry seems to be battening down the hatches.
It's almost at a standstill. I believe that oil companies are doing the absolute minimum that they have to keep their leases and to honour their contracts of supply.
It's also been tough down on the farm. 2 years ago, Pihama farmer Jax Leproux was merging 2 farms and had just invested $1.5 million when the bottom fell out of the market.
We got our budget out and we just went through everything, and we just drew a line through everything that we knew we didn't really need. And that includes Sky TV, you know, included some things that probably the cows probably needed, but we couldn't afford to pay for it.
The dairy payout has since improved, and Mr. Leproux is loosening the purse strings.
You know, we're not going whole hog, but just doing a few things that we really need to do, like we've built a bridge so the cows, it takes them 20 minutes now to get down to the back paddock rather than 2 hours. And just a bit of fencing as well, just to get the paddock sizes a lot better for a 500 cow farm.
James McCone operates a 370 cow dairy farm near Culverden in North Canterbury. It's one of a growing number of irrigated dairy farms in a region once primarily focused on sheep. Mr McCone says the shift to dairy has been positive for the area.
The amount of revenue that dairy farming has brought in and the amount of jobs created and the families that it can be supported has been hugely significant. The school's grown substantially, all the local businesses have grown, there's cafes in town now. It has been really good.
Mr McCone doesn't credit government policies for helping create that prosperity, rather the hard work of locals. The Resource Management Act is one area where he'd like to see more action from the government. He points to the fact that the Huranui Water Project, a North Canterbury irrigation scheme which the government is contributing to, has taken 16 years to get consent.
The time and capital burnt by the local community getting through resource consent process was hugely significant, and certainly in my mind outweighs the benefits that have come from the government grant.
Due to its reliance on commodities such as forestry, mining and fishing, the South Island's west coast is familiar with boom-bust cycles. And few know that better than former miner and fisherman turned tourism operator Mickey Ryan.
When you left school, you went to the mines because it was big money, and your ambition was to get on the coal shoveling it. I suppose when you look at it now, it's laughable, but that's where the big money was,
The end of cement production in Westport last year robbed the area of another 100 jobs, and house prices in the Buller district have dropped 10% in a year. But something else is stirring. Medium household incomes in Buller have jumped by about 2/3 in the 7 years to 2013 to more than $53,000, one of the biggest increases in the country. Down the road from Mr Ryan in Westport is a modern innovation hub where teams of tech wizards are busy creating for global firms like Disney and Sony. The co-founder and chief executive of Epic Westport, Natasha Barnes-Delica, is part of what she describes as an avant-garde move to small towns.
For me, I guess, I'm passionate about environmental issues as well, and so building an economy based on cleaner technologies and creating job opportunities in rural centres, that really appealed to me.
Despite Ms Barnes-Delica's optimism, there is no escaping that Auckland remains New Zealand's economic powerhouse. The City of Sales has the highest medium household income of $76,500. And the country's largest city is set to get larger over the next 20 years, experiencing the majority of the country's population growth. Taranaki, by comparison, can expect a population rise of about 14,000 and Westport a small decline. For Checkpoint, ko Robin Martin Tēnei.
The frozen remains of a Swiss couple who went missing 75 years ago in the Alps have been found on a shrinking glacier. Marcelin and Francine Dumoulin, the parents of 7 children, had gone to feed their cattle in a meadow above Chandolan in the Valais Canton on August 15, 1942. Bridget Burke reports.
Marcelin and Francine Dumoulin's youngest daughter says she's always hoped to give her parents the funeral they deserved. Now, aged 79, Marceline Udry Dumoulin told a Swiss newspaper she and her sister and 5 brothers never gave up looking for their parents, and that after 75 years, news their bodies had been found gave her a deep sense of calm. Swiss police say 2 bodies carrying identity papers were discovered last week by a worker on the Saint-Florent Glacier near a ski lift above Le Diable Resort at an altitude of 8,600 feet. The remains were partly submerged in a hole in the ice. The couple was perfectly preserved in the glacier and their belongings were intact. It's thought the pair fell into a crevasse where their bodies lay for more than 7 decades. The pair were among 280 people listed as missing in the Alps or rivers of the Valais since 1925, officials said. Marcelin Dumoulin, aged 40, was a shoemaker, while Francine, aged 37, was a teacher. Their daughter said it was the first time her mother had accompanied her husband on the trip, as she had always been pregnant and couldn't manage conditions on the glacier. The search for the missing couple lasted for 2 months after their disappearance, and their 7 children were separated and put into foster care. Marceline said whilst she was lucky she went to live with an aunt, she and her siblings became strangers. She said she would wear white to her parents' funeral as it represented hope, which she never lost. For Checkpoint, Bridget Burke.
Coming up after 6 o'clock, the impact on our boat building industry following an early indication that Team New Zealand will require syndicates to build their own boats in their own countries for the next America's Cup. And the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge visit a concentration camp. We'd love your feedback. You can text us on 2101 and you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us Checkpoint with John Campbell, or email us at checkpoint@radionz.co.nz, and we'll have more after 6 o'clock on the America's Cup rules.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening, ko Katrina Batten aho. The union representing staff facing job cuts at Inland Revenue say the integrity of the tax system is at stake. IRD has confirmed it'll shed 30% of its workforce by 2021. Anusha Bradley reports.
Inland Revenue says there will be no reduction in frontline staff and 900 jobs will be reoffered, but another 900 will go. It says there will be fewer management roles but more specialist ones. However, the Public Service Association says there's a lack of clarity over which jobs are affected. The union says staff are concerned the cuts will coincide with the rollout of a new IT system and result in a lack of expertise to deal with any problems that arise. It says up to 4,000 jobs will be affected in some way by the restructuring, but they don't know which jobs exactly until October. Ko Anusha Bradley, aho.
National has dismissed Labour's alternative budget as its usual approach of tax and spend. Labour has released a plan that sacrifices National's promised tax cuts for $17 billion of more social spending over 4 years. It would also raise more tax from multinational companies and property speculators and pay down debt at a slower rate than National plans to do. National's campaign chair, Stephen Joyce, says now is not the time to be racking up more debt.
Well, they'd be able to stay in surplus, but they'd still have to borrow more money because the surplus is going to the big infrastructure spend that we're making, and they are saying that they would actually effectively borrow another $7.2 billion on top of what our borrowing track is. I just think that's too high at this stage of the economic cycle.
National's campaign chair, Stephen Joyce. Team New Zealand says syndicates contesting the next America's Cup will have to have more sailors from their home countries on board and build their own boats. It's released bare outlines of the next Cup, which it expects to stage in Auckland in early 2021. Dr Mark Orams, a yachting commentator and head of sport and recreation at AUT, says it's honouring the history of the America's Cup deed of gift.
It's really a move back to the original concept for the America's Cup, and that is that it is a contest between yacht clubs of foreign nations, and that both the boats themselves and the people sailing them should be citizens of those nations.
Dr Oram says the requirement that boats be built in the team's own country might still allow for some components being of foreign origin. The Kaipara Mayor, Greg Gent, says he was unaware of the extent of homelessness in Dargaville until a community meeting this afternoon. Ministers serving the Tongan community called the meeting after discovering at least 6 families in their congregations have been evicted from homes recently bought by investors or retirees, many of them from Auckland. Greg Gent says the council can't afford to get into social housing, but it may be able to organise some emergency housing in the town. Mr Gent says temporary marae-style shelters for Dargaville's homeless families will be set up in unused buildings in the town, such as the old Polytech. He says while the town needs growth, the Auckland drift is making things very tough for low-income people. A police officer says the Auckland father accused of shooting his 2-year-old daughter in the head told police at the time it was an accident. Constable Kere Taurere was one of the officers at the Sanft family home shortly after Amakura Daniel Sanft was killed in June last year. Edward Gay reports.
Mr Taurere told the High Court in Auckland that he saw Gustav Otto Sanft cradling Amakura on the steps of his house in Favona Road in Mangere. He said Mr Sanft was hysterical and crying, but he heard him say, "I accidentally shot her." Mr Taurere said he was sure of the words. Another officer, Yutaro Kanai, was sure Mr Sanft did not say it was an accident. He told the court he'd gone over the incident repeatedly in his head, and as much as he wants to forget the incident, he can't. Ko Edward Gay aho.
The Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull says diplomats are demanding answers from American authorities over the fatal police shooting of Australian woman Justine Dumond. The 40-year-old was shot dead outside her home in Minneapolis by a police officer as she approached a patrol car. She had earlier called the police to report a possible assault in her neighbourhood. Mr Turnbull says it's a shocking and inexplicable killing.
Our hearts go out to her family. I mean, how can a woman out in the street in her pyjamas seeking assistance from the police be shot like that? It is a shocking killing, and yes, we are demanding answers on behalf of her family.
Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull. It's 6:05. To sport, the New Zealand cyclist George Bennett says he'll turn his focus to next month's Tour of Spain after pulling out of the Tour de France. A devastated Bennett withdrew midway through today's 16th stage due to illness. He was 12th overall when he pulled out, but had been as high as 9th and was hoping to become the first New Zealander to finish in the top 10 of the general classification. Bennett says he'll spend the next week recovering before beginning preparation for La Vuelta.
Good strategy is to start getting excited about the next one, and that's all I can do. And I've already been looking at a few stage profiles from the Vuelta, and that's a big one in Spain in a month's time. And I think this is also part of being a cyclist and being a sportsman is learning to deal with this stuff. And if you can't get over it, if you can't deal with it, then it's game over.
George Bennett. A persistent back strain isn't going to stop New Zealand golfer Michael Hendry from playing in his first major tournament at the British Open this week. Hendry and fellow New Zealander Ryan Fox have qualified for the Open Championship at Royal Birkdale, but Hendry's preparation for the tournament has been hampered by back spasms. The Japan Tour professional has been receiving treatment to help deal with the pain, but he says there's no chance he'll withdraw from the tournament.
It's still niggling in the background, but not to the point where I'm worried about it hurting too much. I can sort of, I suppose, put it to the background. And so, no, I'm excited about the fact that I'll be able to get out on the first tee on Thursday feeling pretty much fully fit.
Michael Hendry. The British Open starts tomorrow night. That's the news.
Calling an ambulance.
Only call if it is a genuine emergency, which is you're not getting better, breathlessness, or you're starting to produce green, horrible spit.
Myrtle rust.
The temperatures aren't sufficient for disease progression, so we don't see the yellow pustules that we would have seen in the summertime.
Fixing Christchurch.
How they could let people in to do substandard work, it really grates my G-string.
It's not always pretty. Morning report weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, clamping down on truck shops that trawl the streets of low-income areas and why budgeting services want to see more crackdowns. And after 10, American theorist Sarah Thentilis on the role of art in the psychology of violence in her new book, Draw Your Weapons. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Taranaki, including Coromandel Bay of Plenty, Taupo and also Gisborne. Often cloudy with a few showers, turning to rain tomorrow with heavy falls and possible downpours, especially in Bay of Plenty. Northeast gales for a time tomorrow. Whanganui to Manawatu, also Taihape, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa. Mainly fine, cloud increasing tomorrow with rain from evening. Horowhenua to Wellington, a few showers today, rain tomorrow evening. Nelson Buller, Westland and Fiordland, occasional rain. Heavy falls about Fiordland from tonight and Nelson late tomorrow. Marlborough and Canterbury, high cloud, occasional rain about the Sounds today, spreading south to Christchurch tomorrow evening. Otago and Southland, high cloud with a few spots of rain today, also a period of rain tomorrow morning. And the Chatham Islands, occasional rain. It's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Kia ora, Katrina. Team New Zealand has released an indication of new protocols for the next America's Cup, which will enforce stricter conditions, including a requirement that syndicates build their own boats and that sailors are citizens of that country. The 36th America's Cup is likely to take place in Auckland in early 2021. But it's raised concerns about the impact on the boat building industry here and if the changes will become a barrier to entry that will mean fewer competitors. The Executive Director of New Zealand Marine Industry Association is Peter Busfield. I asked him if this meant less business for New Zealand boat builders.
There's always a balance involved and sure, from the previous two versions of the America's Cup, we've had over 30 marine industry, boat builders and composite builders contribute to Emirates Team New Zealand, Oracle Team USA, and SoftBank Japan, and I think there were some others as well that had components made in New Zealand. So certainly New Zealand was the desired place for our technology, particularly in high-tech composite technology for building things stronger and lighter, and that's been great for our industry. I mean, it is the Emirates team's prerogative. They did announce this prior to the America's Cup, that they weren't lining up with an accord of all the other challenges, and they wanted to look at the whole rules. So it's not a surprise, and we've just got to trust that Team New Zealand don't throw the baby out with the bathwater and make it so difficult that there's only one or two challenges for the next America's Cup. Otherwise, that would have a detrimental value to New Zealand and the Cup itself. So hopefully they'll consider that. And if I go back to the 34th America's Cup that was held in San Francisco, at that point in time, the hulls of the vessel had to be built in the country of the challenging syndicate, and that did not stop the likes of Core Builders and Walkwith building the balance of Oracle's boat. The Luna Rossa was effectively built in New Zealand. So it depends on the level of the rule of what has to be built in the country of origin.
But under the old rules, under the rules that were much more relaxed, the New Zealand boat building industry would have got a lot more business, wouldn't it?
Going forward to the next version?
Yeah.
Yes, that is correct. I suppose there's a balancing factor in that. If an Emirates Team New Zealand will be weighing this up, is how easy do they want to make it for challenges, and are they likely to defend the next Cup? So there's a balance in there as well. I think New Zealand boat builders and the marine industry would prefer Emirates Team New Zealand to successfully defend the next America's Cup, and will have continuity of business. But there's a balance in there regarding the volume of business for one event versus hopefully Team New Zealand are successfully defending the next America's Cup.
So you want to wait and see what the details of the full details of the rules which are coming out in September?
Correct. We cannot make a final judgment call until we understand those rules, and we just hope there's a balance in there that does allow the marine industry to supply major components for challenging syndicates, and on that basis I think it makes it more affordable for challenging syndicates to enter the Cup, and of course more business for the New Zealand marine industry.
But at this stage it's not looking good.
It's too early to comment.
And that's Peter Busfield from the New Zealand Marine Industry Association. Two men who used coded references to chainsaws, car parts and other items in a bid to outwit possible police surveillance of their drug operation have been jailed. Since their arrest 4 years ago, Clint Helmbright and Lewis Paddon had faced two trials in the High Court in Wellington. Last December, Helmbright was jailed for 12.5 years after being found guilty at trial of dealing a variety of drugs, including methamphetamine, cannabis and BZP. Today, an extra 10 months was added to that term, following his conviction at his second trial in June on 15 other counts relating to dealing methamphetamine. Paddon was jailed for 7 years, having been found guilty in June of supplying a total of 168 grams of methamphetamine to Helmbright. Our court reporter Anne-Marie May filed this report.
The jailing of Clint Helmbright and Lewis Paddon brings to an end Operation Nebraska, a police investigation which began in 2013. Justice Thomas said there were several aggravating features to their offending, including premeditation and clandestine meetings.
Mr. Paddon was particularly cautious in his communications and alive to the possibility of being surveyed. They used codes to discuss the methamphetamine to be supplied. Mr. Helmbright then used different codes when discussing his drug dealing activities with his runners.
The Crown lawyer Emma Light said there was no evidence Lewis Paddon was a heavy user of methamphetamine, selling the drug to support his own habit, and nor was Clint Helmbright.
While it's accepted he was using, his network clearly went beyond simply supporting his own habit. In my submission, that does aggravate matters, that this was a commercial business for profit, not simply to sustain a habit.
Helmbright's lawyer Eric Forster said the court must recognise the lengthy jail term already imposed on his client in December and the fact Helmbright was making a good fist of his time in prison.
He hasn't offended since the 80s.
he's capable of reform. Maybe there's a diminishing return by having him in custody for longer at the taxpayer's expense.
Paddon's lawyer Brian Yeoman said his client had no previous convictions for this kind of drug dealing and his offending was a significant fall from grace for a man who had enjoyed business success.
He's been a panel beater most of the time, and the variety of things that he has done in his life and the business enterprises that he's been in show a man of some considerable talent, and that is sad from his point of view that he now comes before the court to be sentenced in relation to this offending.
Mr Yeoman said Paddon should be given credit for remorse, but Justice Thomas said that was not appropriate.
Not only was there no plea of guilty, but his not guilty plea was maintained over 2 trials. That does not suggest any real remorse. It is also difficult to reconcile Mr Paddon's professed abhorrence for methamphetamine with his offending.
The judge also declined to impose minimum sentences on the men as requested by the Crown. For Checkpoint, Anne-Marie May.
Nelson City's Deputy Mayor says a support network is planned for the city dairy owners after a recent crime spree that has included armed hold-ups of staff. The latest on Sunday night led to the arrest of 3 men in their early 20s who were charged with aggravated robbery. The police say it followed a robbery at a dairy in North Nelson last month and another at the Tahunanui dairy earlier this month, and the robbery of a Liquorland store in central Nelson in May, after which 9 youth offenders were apprehended. Deputy Mayor Paul Matheson told our Nelson reporter Tracy Neal that it's an alarming trend for the city and that plans are underway for a community meeting.
I had a meeting yesterday with the police and said, okay, let's stand up together and support these guys and let them know that they're not alone, and how can we help them get some sort of a support network amongst themselves and with the community, so we've got more ears and eyes out and about.
So what happens next?
We're just trying to put together today a meeting with all dairy owners, both here and in Tasman, because there's no boundaries when it comes to this. And we're going to invite the police and our councillors to come along and sit and talk about how we can get a good network going.
So do you think it's cigarettes that are driving it?
I think there's now quite a black market in cigarettes, and I think it's purely because of the price. What really is disturbing, I think, from a local point of view, is the age of these offenders. They're quite young. Some of them have been 14, 15 and 16. This is quite disturbing. A local dairy is actually quite an extension of your home. Years ago, you go down to the dairy and get a loaf of bread, and the owner of the dairy got to know you and the family and so forth. And it is a bit of an extension of your lifestyle. And it really does have quite an impact, I think, on the community, that extension is being violated.
And that's Nelson Deputy Mayor Paul Matheson. One of the officers involved in the fatal police shooting of Australian woman in the US city of Minneapolis has suggested his partner was startled by a loud noise before the fatal shot was fired. 40-year-old Justine Demond, who was due to be married next month, died of a single gunshot wound to the abdomen after calling the police to report a possible assault in her neighbourhood. Mohammed Noor has been identified as the officer who fired his gun from the patrol car. With more, here's the ABC's David Cody.
The Mayor of Minneapolis, Betsy Hodges, is keenly aware of the demand for answers to the question, why was Australian woman Justine Demond killed by police?
As a community, as a people, we struggle to absorb the weight of this tragedy. The needless death of Justine Demond. Hard day, you guys. The needless death.
The Mayor spoke at a news conference late on Tuesday, US time.
The information the BCA has shared this evening gets us closer to having answers, closer to seeing justice done.
New details are being released about what happened in the lead-up to the shooting on Saturday night. The Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, or BCA, is in charge of a preliminary investigation. It's confirmed the 2 officers in the police car were Mohammed Noor and Matthew Harity. Officer Noor has declined to be interviewed so far, but his partner, Officer Harity, has identified him as the shooter. Mayor Hodges is urging Officer Noor to talk to investigators.
We cannot compel Officer Noor to make a statement. I wish we could. I wish that he would make a statement, is what I want to say.
The pair was responding to Justine Demond's 911 call of a possible assault near her home. They approached the Minneapolis street with their car lights off in search of a suspect. Officer Harity told the BCA as they reached the street that Justine Demond lived on, he was startled by a loud sound near the car. Immediately after that, the woman approached the driver's side window of the car. Officer Harity says Officer Noor, who was sitting in the passenger seat, fired his weapon, hitting Ms Demond through the open driver's side window. The BCA says Justine Demond died of a single gunshot wound to her stomach. One of the questions still going unanswered is why the officers' body cameras were not turned on and why the police car dashboard camera didn't capture the incident. Madeira Arredondo is the Deputy Chief of the Minneapolis Police Department. He says the force's body camera policy is still being worked on.
By the end of next month, mandated supervisor training will be completed throughout the entire MPD. Our frontline supervisors have been tasked with ensuring officers increase the activation of their body cameras.
The Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, told Channel 9 the death is inexplicable.
At this point, it is a tragic loss. This young Australian woman, and again, our hearts go out to her family.
At the scene of the shooting, people are still leaving flowers and lighting candles at a makeshift memorial. There's anger here about how police are using their powers.
David Cody with that report. And early this morning, a group of Ms Demond's friends and families in Sydney held a vigil in a city beach to remember her. A Treasury report criticising the Canterbury District Health Board shows the authority is repeating mistakes from the 1990s, which resulted in deaths. The founder of Canterbury Charity Hospital says Christchurch surgeon Philip Bagshaw and other senior doctors are slamming the report, which says the Health Board's governance is ineffective. Logan Church reports.
Doctors say they were shocked when the Treasury document was released last week without prior warning. The report says the Health Board would expect an almost $40 million deficit in the 2016-2017 financial year, and the management team didn't appear to be willing to respond to the situation. Philip Bagshaw worked as a doctor at the Canterbury District Health Board during the 1990s. He now works at the Canterbury Charity Hospital, which he founded, and says the Treasury is repeating the same mistakes they made 2 decades ago.
Treasury introduced a set of very stringent controls on the DHB. These were enthusiastically taken up by management and the board, calling themselves the vanguard of change, and the result was that they disestablished a whole load of senior nurses and introduced very rigorous controls on how patients were treated.
Dr Bagshaw says this had dire consequences for Cantabrians.
This resulted in quite a lot of unnecessary complications and a series of deaths that we chronicled. There are some very clear similarities in what Treasury is doing. Fortunately, on this occasion, the board is resisting those, thank goodness, and hopefully it will not lead to such a bad situation as it did before.
Dr Bagshaw says the Treasury needs to reassess its priorities and focus less on the bottom line. However, the Minister of Finance, Stephen Joyce, says the doctors are just proving the Treasury's point, that the Health Board are using the media as a tool to get extra funding.
There's a danger that they actually end up proving the point, which is that they want to play their discussions out in the media. I'm just arguing that the DHB leadership should do what I think they should do, which is actually just engage positively with Treasury and the Ministry of Health. They've got a few challenges. I don't think they're as bad as some people think they are, but they definitely need to do some work.
Dr Alistair Humphrey is the Medical Officer of Health at the Canterbury District Health Board. He has compared the release of the report to the Japanese bombing of Pearl Harbor, saying it was a surprise attack. Dr Alistair Humphrey told RNZ's 9 to Noon that the report came as a complete shock.
The problem is that it was dropped by surprise. There was absolutely no consultation with our senior management or our board before this was released. It certainly was an attack. It was a criticism of the board. It was a criticism, effectively is a criticism of all of us.
The Health Minister, Jonathan Coleman, agrees there are challenges, but he says he still has confidence in the Canterbury District Health Board. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Logan Church.
A visit to Poland by Britain's Duke and Duchess of Cambridge took a sobering turn today when they paid a visit to a former Nazi concentration camp. Prince William and his wife Catherine met with Holocaust survivors as they toured Stutthof near Gdansk, where 65,000 people died at the hands of Nazis in World War II. The BBC's royal correspondent Peter Hunt is travelling with them and sent this report.
Poland, a country with a troubled past, provides presidential-style security for visiting royal dignitaries that leaves little to chance. Part of that past is captured here at Stutthof, a concentration camp turned museum with evil on display, the shoes of those murdered. It's an education for all visitors. With 2 survivors, tens of thousands perished, the Duke and the Duchess paid their respects at the camp's Jewish memorial and reflected. What the Nazis did, William and Kate wrote later, was a terrible reminder of the cost of war. They described their visit as shattering. In what was a friendless, soulless place, as teenagers, Manfred and Ziggy formed a friendship for life. They walked out of these death gates in the 40s, alive, against the odds.
This was the only camp I thought I was going to die, because it wasn't only from sickness or starvation, but also the weather. In November here, well below 0 it was, and we were wearing striped pyjamas. That's what we had.
It was an extremely emotional event for me. In the 70-plus years since our liberation, I have never set foot either in Germany or Poland. I put all that behind me.
At this brutal camp and at the others, so many people died, including 3 million Polish Jews. The hope is that this royal visit will help to educate the young and ensure that the horrors of the Holocaust are never forgotten. William and Kate's introduction to Polish history continued when they met Lech Wałęsa, the retired shipyard worker and former president. With the Solidarity trade union movement, he played a part in the downfall of communism. This has been an enlightening day that will linger long in royal memories.
Peter Hunt reporting there from Poland. Amnesty International is accusing the government of abandoning its own principles by refusing to condemn Australia's policy around asylum seekers. Protesters gathered outside the Australian Embassy in Wellington this morning to mark the 4th anniversary of the reopening of detention centres on Nauru and Manus Island. It comes a day after former Prime Minister Sir John Key received Australia's highest honour in recognition of New Zealand and Australia's close bilateral relationship. Emile Donovan reports.
Victoria Quaid was born in Melbourne but moved to Wellington about 30 years ago.
I'm Australian and I'm ashamed at the way the Australian government is treating refugees.
She and her son were 2 of about 30 people who, early on a chilly Wellington morning, gathered outside the Australian Embassy to protest that country's treatment of refugees and asylum seekers. Today marks 4 years since the Australian government, under then Prime Minister Kevin Rudd, reopened detention facilities on Papua New Guinea's Manus Island and the tiny Micronesian island of Nauru. That decision meant any asylum seekers arriving in Australia by boat would be taken offshore for processing before being resettled in Papua New Guinea if they met refugee criteria. Since then, controversies such as the well-documented reports of abuse of some asylum seekers have led to widespread condemnation, but not from the New Zealand government. The Executive Director for New Zealand's branch of Amnesty International, Grant Balladon, says the government's continued refusal to denounce the camps reeks of hypocrisy.
The New Zealand government has been vocal in speaking out on human rights abuses in other countries around the world like Saudi Arabia and Iran, but it's been completely silent on the issue of abuse of asylum seekers and refugees in offshore detention by the Australian government. So we definitely need to hear much more from the New Zealand government on this issue.
He sees this as an issue of global importance, and fear of political repercussions should not be a factor.
This is an issue that transcends politics. This is about our values as a nation. We offer people protection who are in desperate situations. We don't imprison them and lock them up. That's something that the New Zealand government should stand firm on with the Australian government and hold to its principles.
And those calls were echoed by some of the younger voices in attendance, like Abby Fisher.
I think that it's very hypocritical for Australia to turn around and put people seeking asylum in detention when every human should be able to seek asylum, whether they come by boat or by plane. I'd like to see New Zealand put on a lot more pressure to Australia.
And Victoria Quaid says if people knew what asylum seekers have to go through, they'd be a lot more sympathetic to their cause.
I teach English to migrant and refugees. They're people. I don't know if I could cope with this kind of things that some of my students have faced. And so that's why I'm here.
According to the Australian government, just over 1,250 people were still being held on Manus and Nauru as of last October. That figure includes 50 women and 45 children. For Checkpoint, ko Emile Donovan-Aho.
And that's Checkpoint tonight. See you tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The union representing staff facing job cuts at Inland Revenue say the integrity of the tax system is at stake following today's news that 30% of its workforce will be gone in 4 years. The Kaipara Mayor, Greg Gent, says he was unaware of the extent of homelessness in Dargaville until a community meeting this afternoon. And more than 300 people are at a community hall in the town of Ashurst tonight to learn about the future of the Manawatu Gorge road, which may never reopen. Our next news and weather is at 7.
When I found out, I was devastated.